record. Right then. So, session 3 of our Northern Digital Storytelling Festival 2023. We had a cracking day yesterday with our first 2 sessions, and we felt really actually excited at the end of the sessions yesterday. So they are now available on our website, northerndigifest.co.uk. If you just look on the session recordings tab, then we're keeping all of our sessions up there for folk who have missed the sessions during the day or in the evening. So have a look at that. They're well worth a look. There's some really excellent talks up there and some great conversations. Okay, so my name's Heather Niven, and my colleague Maggie. Wave Maggie. We're both running the festival this year. It's been kindly sponsored by the Screen Industries Growth Network. So thanks to them, without whom we wouldn't be able to run it, or if we did, we'd be living on beans. So thanks very much to them for supporting the festival for us for this year. So for the next hour and a half, we're going to have curated talks by these lovely people, Bright White, Bright Black, and Kev from Inspired Youth. We're going to hopefully empower, upskill, inspire, and demystify a lot of the elements around digital storytelling. And over the course of the festival, we've got theatre, we've got AI, XR, tech, we've got traditional storytelling, and we're trying to bring these disparate groups of people together to have conversations that they might not normally have, and to really kind of just get folk not out of their comfort zone, because it is quite comfortable here. It's a bit like having a cup of tea with your mates in the living room, but more about just trying to think about things in slightly different ways, and to kind of encourage conversation and innovation, hopefully as a result of that. So it's accessible to everybody, free to attend. It's live online, and it's, all, as I say, already available for afterwards on our website. So format is, I'll do a wee quick intro about everybody at the beginning of their sessions, 15-minute talk, and then we'll do that 3 times, and then we'll have a bit of a panel discussion, and if folk in the audience have questions, we'll chuck them into the mix as well. Have a wee bit of a chat at the end, and an hour and a half later, you can all go and have your lunch, and that'll be us done. Okay, so let's get cracking then. So the first people up are Bright Black. If I can just find your, yeah, there we go. So Myra Appennah and Simon Wilkinson set up Bright Black in 2019. And they set it up to explore the radical potential of immersive technologies to create playable, interactive experiences that democratize, disrupt, and decolonize our culture. Their works have toured 36 countries on 5 continents, featuring at venues including Tate Modern and an abandoned toilet in the Arizona desert. And they've run hundreds of labs, consultancies, and commissions with universities and institutions such as the Royal Shakespeare Company, the British Council, and Sydney Opera House. They also mentor emerging and underrepresented artists with the aim of creating a new paradigm for culture that gives power back to the individual and the community. So for the talk today, they're going to talk about the psychology of immersion and the virtual realities that are happening to you every day. Over to you guys.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Thanks everyone for being here. They can't reach out and see you and touch you. Not that that's appropriate, but so I'm going to start sharing my screen now. And just to give you a bit of background, can everyone, Heather, can you see that share? Yeah, good. So this is us being idiots. And beyond that, we, as Heather said, make playable, participatory artworks that are about building and reaching new audiences, people that don't ordinarily engage with like arts and culture. And here's a little show reel of some of our work. Ooh, is it going to move? Yes.
Okay, so one of the things we do is we run it's kind of our studio on tour, our studio practice on tour, called Immersive Story Lab. And as part of that, what we do is we look at audience trends as a way of thinking about making culture that reaches as many people as possible. And so we started looking at this probably about 2017, 2018, before the company was even formed. We got a commission from Stomp to do an immersive storytelling masterclass. And what we found in terms of audience trends was that, well, here we have video games. So video games from 2007, about 35 billion, 2022, 220 billion. So massive growth. In the same time, cinema has been largely stagnant for most of that. So it's hovered around 35 billion the whole time. But then in the pandemic, it took a big nosedive down to about 12.5 billion, which put it at the same level as music. To put that in context, Netflix is worth about 15 billion. YouTube is much bigger than Netflix. And even within something like theatre's been in very dramatic decline for a long time and has been sort of focusing more on a very specific demographic of people who go to theatre. But even within that, immersive theatre has been in growth. And so when we look at all those audience trends, and we're really summarizing here because there's a lot more information in this, what we see is that things that are interactive and participatory in a meaningful way are in growth, and things that are passive in terms of the way we consume them are either stagnant or in decline. And Myra and I, we studied economics. That's our background, and we became artists out of that sort of background, which is an interesting route. And economics, I've just told you about some numbers, which are dollars. Revenue per year, and that's one way of measuring things, but there are many other ways of measuring things in economics that are really useful, and one of which is marginal utility. So that has nothing to do with money per se. It has a lot to do with how satisfied you feel. So if I was to give Myra £1.20 to go and buy herself a Mars bar, I would expect, knowing she's a fan of Mars bars, that she would tell me at the end of eating that Mars bar that for that £1.20 she felt, let's say, a 90% level of satisfaction. But if I add another marginal £1.20, so she now spent £2.40, I'd expect after the second Mars bar for her satisfaction to be a little lower. And we would expect, as we add them, it goes lower and lower until she's had too many Mars bars and she's in negative. And that's what we'd expect from a marginal utility curve. With gaming, we don't see that curve in the same way as we do with cinema, theatre, and other things. There is something about gaming which means that the more people play it, their satisfaction doesn't decline in the same way. And when we look at Steam stats, so on Steam, the online platform for games on PC and Mac, what we see is that, contrary to the idea that young people's attention spans have been falling over the past 20, 30 years, what we see is that when you look at video games, people's attention spans have massively expanded, with the most played game on Steam being played for an average 430 hours. The idea that somebody would watch a movie for that long is obviously ludicrous, or even a series of movies for that long is ludicrous. But with video games, something interesting is going on. And that's what we've been focusing on in terms of looking at how we're going to make our artworks and culture for people.
So this kind of points to something that might seem a bit terrifying, which is mass exodus into virtual worlds. So an economist called Edward Castronova pointed to this quite a while ago now. But under the hood, it's really like, the question is, I guess, what are we fleeing from? What are we trying to escape? There's a great book called Reality is Broken by the game academic Jane McGonigal, and in the title you can see that obviously there's something deeply compelling about virtual spaces and game spaces that is feeding us in a way that the real world isn't. And looking at what that is, as Simon mentioned, immersion and interactivity is really driving that. And that's not new, but something did kind of fracture it. So Our very first attempts at storytelling that we can kind of discover as people that live now in cave paintings. They've recently done lots of research showing that where cave paintings and drawings were positioned in the cave, right at the back of caves or within intricate cave systems, showed that the way the light flickered and filtered through to the back of the cave basically animated these images and brought them to life. The air was carboxylic, so high in carbon dioxide, so lots of people that came to or engaged with these paintings were basically on a high and experiencing altered states of mind. So the images are flickering, there's an altered state of mind, but also there's vibroacoustics, the way the sound is bouncing off these walls in this intimate space, which points really to these immersive experiences that people are having and these multi-sensory stories. And then as we sort of came around the fire to tell stories in groups, we would be telling stories that were responsive and adaptive, and they were stories about survival, as were the paintings, because if there was a big bear in the environment coming towards us, there was a big bear, we knew that there were dangerous creatures around. I needed to make sure, if I was a storyteller, as part of my little community, that I told you a story that was scary enough that you just totally avoided the bear and didn't get eaten. But if you weren't scared enough, I would be able to ramp up the story for you. Or if you were too scared, I didn't want to give you nightmares and ruin your life, I would be able to ramp down the story as well. So in the complex human algorithm, I would be able to respond individually to what you needed to hear to survive. And then came the mass industrialization of storytelling. So when we started to have these theatre spaces and this industry around film and theatre, where we had to fill these spaces with people and they all sat in their seats and they watched the action happen in front of them. And we had big timelines and budgets and costs to justify. These are the same structures that led us to stories that were not responsive and adaptable, linear stories that go from A to B, passive experiences that we watch happen in front of us. And now with immersive technologies, we are looking again at adaptive, responsive, multi-sensory stories. This is a still from Somni, which was the large-scale work I was the creative director on in 2018. And essentially, it was over 20,000 square feet of warehouse space converted into a map of your subconscious mind. And you meet an AI who's spiritually transcended human beings, because I wanted to ask the question, are we so unmoored that we'll default to any god? And you follow this character through your dreams, essentially, you end up mastering your dreams. And at a critical moment, that character breaks your trust. And what we observed in the experience was that people still blindly followed this character into some quite dark and scary territory. And really, these stories were about, in this multi-sensory environment, this story becoming not a passive linear experience, but something that people going through the experience really lived. So the choices they made became a question about who am I and what are the what are the facets of me? Like, I didn't realize I was the sort of person that would behave like this in a group, that, take these actions. And so they're big, self-reflective, transformative spaces. The new piece of work we're doing at the moment is a commission by Hospice UK. which takes all that idea of immersion and interactivity to help open up a conversation about death. And you enter a virtual environment where you engage with these characters that start to open up this conversation. And because we're moving sort of beyond the human, and without a human being sitting in front of you and the potential judgments and self kind of awareness of that conversation, people are really able to free roam, affect the virtual space, go into quite deep and awesome conversations. And then we record their audio. And the second phase we're working on now is bringing all those beautiful things people said into a live audio visual experience, so we can have a collective moment on grief. So taking this sort of individual, intimate space and making it into an epic collective moment where we all can indulge and think and feel how we feel about these quite difficult subjects.
And it sounds like a funny thing to say, but what we're doing with this is sort of taking inspiration from a type of storytelling that probably the biggest example of in the world is Minecraft. And that is the idea that instead of having an author who writes a story to tell to you, which in itself indicates you don't have any agency, then instead what we do is we create a structure with a speculative design at its core, i.e. we create a structure within which we and you as the artists and the audience engage together around a question. Can you move it forward, please? And this plays into an element of game system design where not everything that you do in creating an artwork or a video game is dictating what the audience does. What's the term for that, Myra? I always forget at this point. Emergent behavior. So there's a facet of game system design called emergent behavior. So game system design, which can be applied to anything. It can be applied to building a school, making a hospital, or making a video game, is the practical application of positive psychology, i.e., and this makes sense of some of those numbers of why video games are so popular. What we're doing is creating structures and systems which are there to engage you in a way that makes you feel happy. And that can sound very shallow, but actually when we dig deeper, which we're not going to today, it actually goes very deep to the core of what we are as human beings.
So as we mentioned, the possibilities of these spaces are to not watch action happen, but to internalize choices and internalize the story. And in those stories, the key kind of differences are that you have agency. So if we think about reality being broken and we are losing our participation in our culture and our politics and the whole kind of all the aspects of the world we live in, agency is really important. And that being able to create your own story, explore what you want to explore, take decisions, take risks that in these spaces that are safe spaces is really profound. And then within that have stories that allow us to reflect on ourselves and an introspective space to figure out who we are. All this kind of looks at how we're no longer in stories seeing a character that goes on a journey and changes over time. We watch and observe that, but we ourselves can transform. And looking at how those stories are made, moving from scripts that are written by a single person that have to go through a long process to get created to the worlds that we now make. So Minecraft, for example, is one of the biggest games on the planet, and that is like millions of stories happening every day. People are go into the game and they build their own worlds, and it's much like when you see a child kind of focus on, you know, a little area in front of them, and they're just building all these stories in these worlds. And that is really, you know, play spaces where we can really imagine and be these sort of infinite selves. And these are our metaverses. So when Mark Zuckerberg comes in with his weird Zoom call version of the metaverse or conference room, these imaginative spaces already exist. They're already Fortnite, where players aren't playing the game, they're making their own stories. Minecraft, where people are churning out millions of stories a day. This is where people's are living their culture.
So one thing we know from all of those stats is that, and it's not a new thing, but people are increasingly living their culture rather than passively consuming it. And that, if we go back and think about music in the 1970s and 80s, where people would get the same haircut as their favorite pop star, or skateboarders who always, wear skating shoes and so on and so forth, there's an element that's always been there, but we're moving into something more direct with video games in particular. Can we move forward one?
Yes.
Slide. Another trend in media that's really critical to pay attention to is new power. So this came out of some research by 2 Canadian academics. And the best way of describing new power versus old power is to think about the case of Me Too versus Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein was the epitome of old power. He was protected by his wealth. That wealth and power was something that was difficult to get. He had it, we didn't. Twitter came along as a technology and provided a platform whereby, rather than having, if you think about it in terms of currency, is very old power, but current in terms of Twitter, i.e., if you can get 3 million people behind you on Twitter, then you can make change. And we all know that with Harvey Weinstein, if it wasn't for Twitter and the women who came out and bravely kind of, made those initial steps, and then the current that built behind that, then Harvey Weinstein almost certainly wouldn't have gone to prison, but he certainly wouldn't have gone for 23 years. So new power is really about all the things we've been talking about, and it really does have real world ramifications.
I think if you've read the headlines this morning, the damning report that's come out about the Met really points to what happens in old power systems, where you have centralized power that is not transparent. You have no networks. The same people get marginalized, and the same people become victims of that system. So it's a good example to show how hierarchical, authoritarian form structures and systems really breed toxic ideas and behaviors. And so it's really important to think about who owns those old power structures, who owns those authoritarian structures. Media and government, they're hierarchical systems with top-down problem solving. And when we think about that, they are defined by the stories, and they define the stories that make us who we are as people, the stories of the nations we belong to and what that means. Then you can see we need more. It's critical that we have more voices, that the people that own stories and the people that make stories are democratized and diverse and networked across the world. And that, in a new power sense, is how stories are evolving.
So Whilst versus Sleeping was a show that I made. It was a very large scale show that was centered around virtual reality. And when I was making this, I was thinking about those powerful entities that controlled the narrative. And I looked at the history of that right from the Creel Committee in the First World War through to the essay, The Engineering of Consent, and the Mohawk Valley Formula, and various other things that happened in history where powerful people have written down how they create virtual worlds for people. And bear in mind, they've done that with newsprint, radio articles, and TV and so on and so forth. And I thought that as an artist, very often we're sort of limping along with things that aren't very powerful in comparison to that. And I wanted to set the challenge of making a show which used their techniques to tell a story. So with Whilst versus Sleeping, this is Federation Square where it premiered. What you see is a square that can hold 10,000 people, and there's a stage at the front. And what was the main event for most people was a hour-long documentary about a mass disappearance that happened in America. As it's playing, there are 8 young people on stage that are reading extracts from letters of the people who went missing. The only thing that was left behind by them were 8 letters. And I'm playing a live soundtrack, and the people here are watching, and 63% of them went online. And when they went online, they found something like 30 websites, which were Wikipedia pages and so on and so forth. And in the back, in those buildings at the back, at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image and the gallery at the back there were 17 virtual reality installations, augmented reality, physical exhibitions of props that were evidence from the case and so on. And what the audience didn't know was that the whole thing was made up, like most sort of propagandist things. And the aim of this was to fool as many people as possible and then reveal to them what had just happened, so that they could see that the whole show was really a debate, an interaction that was a debate around how we know which media and which stories we can trust. This went to 30 countries, and it followed on from the sort of the career of this man, which is Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, who managed with propaganda that appealed to that linked products and wars and various political parties with our Freudian desires, and through using those techniques, managed to make it so that women became the majority of smokers when literally women didn't smoke at one point, and various other things. The invasion of Guatemala by the USA and all sorts of things were brokered without any bullets needing to be fired, almost through propaganda. And I thought that was really interesting, but shows you that we've never known the difference between truth and fiction, and that when it comes to stories, it is very easy to be evil, and it is very easy to be good, and that's sort of interesting. We've got very little time left, by the way, Myra.
Yes, I'll skip through this very quickly because just to sum up, really, that looking at the power of stories in virtual spaces, one of the key aspects is first-person perspectives, and whether they're virtual stories or written text, something very interesting is happening. Carnegie Mellon did some research which showed that in a first-person story where you can't see your body, so you don't know who you are, and you experience the story in the world from this character's point of view, if 3/4 of the way that character's gender identity, race, disability is revealed, you're much more likely to sympathize with them. So we have this kind of adoption of virtual bodies and virtual spaces that we can free from our biases by using certain techniques. And when, if we apply that to the real world, again for a moment, when Mahsa Amini was emerged from police custody after being taken for wearing her hijab wrong, supposedly, and then died 3 days later. People around, women around Iran were protesting by shaving their heads and cutting their hair. So they were able to very quickly reach a global population with that news by using TikTok, Instagram, and in first-person perspective, but also showing themselves taking radical action. As soon as that caught fire and went completely viral, the government, as in old power, stepped in and shut it down because they understood the power of the internet. It was too late. The whole world already knew what had happened. And if anyone knows Pussy Riot, thinking about those two spaces, though, how we sort of categorize them as virtual and real, and understanding what's going on under the hood, how they're designed and how they can be remade to serve us. The Texas building in Capitol, the Texas Capitol building, they were debating reproductive rights, and obviously states across the US were banning abortion. Pussy Riot walked into this space, and there were lots of statespeople and people making important decisions about women's rights, and they dropped a, I'm going to say 30-foot banner from the 3rd floor of the building. And in that moment, they realized they were creating a real world disruption, but also they minted that moment and they sold it as an NFT, and they raised over $4 million for women's reproductive charities. So understanding what's going on and how we can reimagine it to serve us is really important. And really part of that is thinking about how we ask better questions. So if I was to say, how do we solve climate change? I would get generic answers. So when we're dealing with lots of people participating in our works, or lots of audiences with participation, at the heart of what we do, we need to ask them better questions that they can then find the answers to. So if I was to ask them at the centre of my artwork, why is 70% of global warming deniers white, affluent, conservative males? Why are women 14 times more likely to die in climate disasters than men? And why are men more likely to commit suicide as a result? We start to get some really interesting perspectives where our audiences can figure answers or explore complex systems rather than very simplistic linear narratives. And then we will also need to develop better stories. So is the evolution of the human species about these iconic individual white guys that came up with amazing inventions like the light bulb and the steam engine and the computer? Or is it a site of cumulative knowledge that has grown over time? So who put bread and yeast together and made all our favorite doughy snacks? It was probably, we don't know, but it was probably a woman, and they were probably not a white woman. And New Ways to Feel, Audre Lorde, the Black activist and writer, said there are no new stories, just new ways to feel them. And I think that's where we are with trying to get these better questions, better stories out to people to experience them in new ways. And that is us.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much. Lots and lots of food for thought there. So yeah, that was amazing. Thank you. Right. Everyone's gone quiet. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to the next talk, and then at the end, once we've had the 3 talks, then we'll have a bit of a conversation. That'll give folk time to digest as well, if that's okay with you guys.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, Bill. Okay, so Chris, you're up next. So Chris from Bright White is Chris is the founder director of Bright White Ltd, who are a creative design consultancy based in York. Founded in 2004, Bright White Ltd specialise in all aspects of interpretation, innovation and experience design. Their mission is to engage the next generation with the riches of the past and the present, and to help individuals and communities tell their story. Bright White believe that when learning through stories, learning is best facilitated by the act of doing without labour. To accomplish this, they give the audience real agency to explore a subject, thereby sparking interest and ultimately creating unforgettable moments. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Heather. Oh, just kicked me out. Just one second to
All right.
reshare. Sorry, switching my microphone on. Stop the presentation. Just bear with me.
No worries. Just take your time. It's okay.
Okay.
Cup of tea
Is
in the
that
living room.
visible?
Yeah.
So, okay, you can see the slide. Great. Thank you, Heather. My name's Chris Walker. I'm the founding director of Bright White Ltd. We started in 2004, and we're based at the Guildhall in York. And this project that I'd like to share with you is called the Forever Project, and it was a project for the National Holocaust Centre and Museum, which is in Nottinghamshire. So a little bit about the centre. The centre has a national portfolio now from the Arts Council, and its mission is to communicate the memory of the Holocaust for a contemporary purpose, to cultivate upstanders against the hatred and persecution of difference. And it has 3 main columns to its activity, which is witness, to collect Holocaust testimony and artifacts as the UK's only accredited Holocaust museum, to create world-class curatorial and academic expertise brought to life with innovative exhibitions and storytelling and immersive digital technologies that truly involve the audience, and to distribute, to make these learning experiences accessible in the widest range of places and formats, to continually reach new audiences and provoke attitudinal changes across our communities. And part of every visit to the National Holocaust Centre is an opportunity to hear testimony
of a visiting survivor to ask questions and get answers, or at least until the pandemic, that was the case anyway. Just thinking about audiences, who are the audiences at the National Holocaust Centre? We've got primary schools, a lot of primary schools. They learn about the Kindertransport. They don't learn about the camps. Secondary schools and sixth form, they do learn about the camps. There's quite a lot of schools outreach, even more so post-pandemic. University and PGCE students, a lot of conferences, and a lot of programs, community programs, and they have relationships with the police force, for example, and professional training in CPD, and then community and adult groups and special interest groups. A really, really wide-ranging audience. And then just a little bit of context so that everything makes sense that I'm going to talk about. So firstly, interpretation, which is our work, what we do. We help individuals and communities to tell their story. That its professional term is interpretation, and that involves media. Nearly everything we do has an output in a different medium, and all forms of media are susceptible to being used as propaganda, of course. That Holocaust education is actively used to fight hate crime in this country. And Holocaust denial is a very real phenomenon. That there's heightened academic sensitivity over the reliability of historical source material with respect to the Holocaust. It gets scrutinized to an unusual degree. And of course, the most relevant point there is that the post-survivor era is looming. Soon we won't have living witnesses to that, hence this project. So just a little bit about the survivors. So we have actually filmed 13 survivors in this way now. They are all resident in the UK, and they have all they come from a background of speaking to audiences about their experience, most of which from the National Holocaust Centre itself, but other places as well. So survivors speak in lots of different places, not just the NHC. And there's the other 9 of them, a mixture of people from all different walks of life, from different parts of Europe. Some grew up in Germany, others in the Netherlands, Poland, all over, really. So a nice rounded mixture of experience, a variety of different ages as well. Not everybody's the same age. Yeah, just onto the production really, which is like, how do we help these stories get told in a reliable way? Well, the production was filmed in York, or in and around York, and some near London. Started in December 2014, with the last session, I think, was 2018. But we filmed in total, this is slightly out of date, actually. Sorry, it's actually now 260 hours of film, 13 testimonies, and 13,000 questions. So each survivor, we had the luxury of being able to have them in the studio for a week each, 5 days straight. And that meant that we could film their testimony, but we could also ask them, on average, 1,000 questions each. And those questions were generated through a really interesting process of the formation of panels, which consisted of experts, historians, the kind of people you might imagine, but also school children, different ages. Whenever questions were asked in those testimony sessions at the NHC, then those questions were logged and added, so that it was a really rounded audience of who had generated these questions, such that the questions that we could ask the survivor had that same roundedness about them. And they were filmed in 3D with a third camera focusing on facial close-up. The questions were really, really varied. So a lot of them were could be considered sort of quite general questions about, you know, how did you feel about maybe your faith, or you know, what's the last thing that your mother or father said to you? You know, the questions that could apply to anybody really who'd been through that experience, and could be transferred from one survivor to another to a degree. That was about half of the questions, but the other 500 were very, very highly specific kind of forensic questions about the testimony they've just given and their experience as well. So just a few shots from the studio there. Being with them for a week meant that we could build a really fantastic level of camaraderie, and they also inputted into the questions that were asked as well, which is great. They were able to pull on their kind of history of different questions they've been asked that they found interesting. But the paperwork systems that we had in place to ensure that we did ask every question, that it was asked correctly, and that we kept track of progress was immense. It was far beyond the normal film project. The project generated something like 60,000 media assets, which all had to be data wrangled and QA on them, because what we were making, it turned out, was a new archive. It was a really large amount of data, and the structured nature of it meant that you know, it could be interrogated in different ways. You could look at the questions that an individual had been asked, but then also you could say, well, actually everybody was asked this question. How did they respond across the whole cohort? So really important that we got all the data side of it absolutely right. Thinking very much in the future, you know, how might this be used in 10, 20, 50 years time? And trying to always make sure we left the door open for those kind of uses in the future for anybody who's potentially going to try and work with this body of work. All of the survivors took a real interest in the process, and we always took a lot of interest, real interest in their life experience, and all the breaks in between filming were just jammed with questions and answers in both directions. There just wasn't a silent moment in that studio at all for that whole period. So pre-pandemic, the plan, and in fact the installation, was to try and recreate what happened at the Holocaust Centre, which is this sort of audience with model where a survivor sits on stage, gives their story, lasts about 45 minutes or so, and then the audience are free to ask a question and get an answer. But pandemic being the pandemic, actually, I think that the way that this is being used now is through the web. So there's a web version of the same thing. So yeah, that's really just a consequence of the pandemic, I believe. And the project attracted some interest from unusual places, and you know, we normally at this point go on to talk about the technology behind it, because that's what we're told that people want to hear about. But so it's a welcome departure for me to instead talk about something that I think is far more important, which is the methodology and the guiding principles and the technique and the ethics and the content of that. So I wasn't even aware that this award existed, but we were chosen, and the project was awarded this Nominate Trust winner for celebrating the innovators using digital technology to change the world for the better. So yeah, just a little thought experiment. Imagine that we're sort of like 200 years in the future. How might this be used, considering that it's structured and there is 3D data in there in the stereo filming, that there's this facial close-up, and that we have all these survivor testimonies. I think it could be really, really interesting. You know, we would love to have discovered a similar kind of archive that was made maybe in the 1940s or 50s or so to work with that. That would have been a real goldmine. So hopefully, you know, what we've done is laid the seeds there for something really interesting to happen in the future as well as today. But the project relied on its methodology, and key parts of that methodology included aspects around memory. So we're trying to make a robust storytelling experience here. These 13 people have these stories that they want to tell. So there was no prior view of the questions to the survivors whatsoever. Everything that they answered was the first time they'd heard that question from us. Sometimes they may have heard it from other audiences. But there were highly detailed forensic questions that sought to elaborate on all the events and the people and places, a sort of systematic combing of the events of the survivors, of the events that the survivors used to describe in their testimony. So literally every fact and moment and turning point in their story, there are questions around that, establishing the kind of the full sort of picture. So what we imagined it as they were taking us on a walk through a forest to certain clearings, which is where their kind of story existed. But just every now and again, from something they'd say, they'd sort of give you a glimpse of something just beyond the trees. So we made sure we picked up on all of those, such that there was a really thorough story experience through the whole thing, if that's how you wanted to engage with it. They created a huge interconnecting mass of questions, and there were, as I mentioned before, about the questions are generated by a mixed panel representative of those audiences, and with varying perspectives from which those questions arose. And there were no briefings on topics or questions at all from us. So what did we find important in making this? In this documentary technique, there were no leading questions. That was actually really hard to do. It was very, very tempting to think of questions, or for the audience to think of questions that would lead the survivor into a particular way. So having to go through and remove any leading aspects of any questions was important, but very difficult. We used a full body and facial close-up cameras, so we captured their body language as well as their verbal response. That all the archived rushes include the question as spoken to them. So in studio, questioner asks question, survivor responds. Actually, in the interactive version of this, you don't hear the questioner speak because you've asked that question. But actually in the original rush, we've left those in, so we can always track back and be traceable, transparent, as Myra mentioned, transparency. You can always track back and say, no, that is actually how this person answered this specific question. The raw files that were shot in the camera technique were tagged with metadata and effectively created a digital watermark, which is almost impossible to cheat. So kind of creating a kind of integrity to the data assets there. All the questions and the methodology and a documented account of the project are saved with the film rushes. It's all as one big bin of data, hoping this kind of people might find it, in the future, and that they would then know the thoroughness through which the questions were generated and asked and recorded. And the only time we used second takes were really for technical issues. We did have a few camera desyncing issues and things like that, or an aeroplane flew overhead close by, but we didn't ever ask them just to retake a question because we didn't like the answer. That's how they were asked the question, that's how they answered on the day. So there was all sorts of different sort of metadata processes involved in that to make sure that it's fully traceable in the future. So you could always get back to the original rush and see how they answer, trying to avoid any kind of potential for doubt to creep in about whether this person had actually answered in that way. Just a little bit more about what was important. We were always using first-hand accounts. We featured on breadth and depth. We had the polyvocality of 13 different experiences. We were always clear about the fallibility of human memory, how our internal biases as a production team could affect the output if it was left unchecked. That was really, really hard to thrash that out. The role of the academic partners involved in it in providing rigor, and the important role of cultural organizations as these trusted organizations, and the ethics of working with the contributors and the survivors themselves was super important. How to elicit the best response from subjects, critical right the way through the process. And then just lastly as well, this idea of cognitive flexibility theory. It's just the idea that you don't need to tell a story necessarily in historical terms from the start and move through to the end and complete at the conclusion. In fact, that will only ever really give you one person's sort of narrative arc. That if you can listen to 13 stories like this and start to build actually domain concepts from that, it's much more powerful. So yes, it's the importance of kind of like giving the audience a role to sort of start to build things in their minds as they listen to multiple different versions of events. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Brilliant, that was great. Thank you, Chris. And I never get tired of hearing that story. Actually, I've been the recipient of that story a number of times, and every time I hear it, I just think how amazing. And didn't you bury everything as well? Didn't you put it all in a time capsule for archaeologists in years to come to be, or is it just in a file somewhere? I've got this mental image that you've buried it, but that could be wrong.
I think it's a metaphorical time capsule.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I'm already making up history myself. So brilliant. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chris. Okay, guys. A couple of folk have started putting questions in the Q&A. Participants, feel free to add questions as you think of them and as you're digesting what's being said, and we'll come to them at the end. But before we do that, we have the wonderful Kev from Inspired Youth, who's going to do a little stint for us as well. So Kev, I'll just have a little introduction for Kev. So Kev's an award-winning filmmaker and campaigner. He has 15 years of experience in projects that ignite positive debate around social issues. After earning a first-class degree in film and media at Plymouth University, he won a Royal Television Society Award for his first film, Inner Sense, about domestic violence, and has continued to raise awareness with his work since. His passion is to collaborate with people at the heart of the experience. And Kev's been working for Inspired Youth now. Well, I've known you for over 15 years. I'm not sure how long you've been in the game, but Kev's been doing some amazing work with young folk, marginalised people, and helping them to find their voice and tell their stories. So over to you, Kev.
Well, first of all, what an absolute stitch up that I've got to follow those two presentations. Like, I mean, the last one was really emotional. I found it really emotional, and yeah, you guys at the start, like visually impactful, like really amazing and inspiring. And I think like I had a naive sort of assumption about these emerging technologies and this sort of like AI sort of metaverse sort of digital technologies, that it's all to a commercial ends. And actually I'm learning today that people are doing social work with that kind of technology. So I was quite inspired by that. I'm just going to share my screen. Also, I always wince when someone does the intro. It's a bit like someone singing happy birthday. It's a bit like, can't wait till it's finished, you know. Okay, so I'm Kev from Inspired Youth. Can you all hear me? Am I on mute? No. Okay, you can. Yeah, cool. Okay, so Inspired Youth is a not-for-profit social enterprise. I founded it in 2007, and yeah, we work with people in communities. We are passionate about tackling social issues and working with the people most affected by those issues to create stories and explore themes and key messages to then create public-facing campaigns to tackle stereotypes, you know, to impact on the community, to change perceptions and that kind of thing. So part of my work is working with young people, and part of my work is working with adults that are either isolated or affected by some kind of social issue. So I've done a range of topics, you know, from like working with children in the care system, children leaving the care system, homelessness and youth homelessness, anything that's about an issue that's important in the community and involving the people affected by that issue in creating messages that, yeah, challenge and provoke debate. So my products and sort of exhibitions and screenings, it isn't about we've made this story and captured it all for you to sort of consume. It's about that being a sort of like spark in the debate and getting people involved and collaborating and communicating about those issues and having a having a voice on them and working together to make social change. So I'm just going to show a little clip, and oh, I don't think I clicked the box. I'm going to have to re-share with the sound.
Don't forget to click the box, Kev.
Yes, don't forget to click the box.
We are a multi-award winning organisation. We are leaders of social change. We collaborate with leading organisations to influence hearts and minds. We are driven to change the world. We challenge stigma, break down prejudice, and raise awareness. We use heart and passion to create powerful films that unlock limitless potential. We put real people at the heart of the journey. We share experience with the world to inspire hearts and minds. We share powerful stories that educate, challenge, and inspire. We are inspired youth. Together we can achieve greatness. Aspire to more.
What is supposed to happen? Okay, so as you hear in the advert there, it's about aspirations as well. For me, it's about sometimes in communities people feel forgotten or isolated or left behind, or sometimes feel like they've got a cause that's not being listened to, or just that they're not included, they're not connected. And I think one of the things that's beautiful about stories is that they connect us. And I was thinking about this presentation and thinking, what's my story got to do with me telling this story? And sometimes I include my own story when I do presentations, and sometimes I don't. But really, I wanted to say today that I found creative writing when I was a child because I lost a brother to suicide, and this creative outlet, this source of creativity in able to like express my emotions and do something with that raw emotion and the impact that had on my life was really a lifesaver to me. And it sort of led me into the creative world and going to college and doing media and exploring storytelling. And I always dreamed of becoming a filmmaker. And I can remember sitting in my bedroom as a child in a council estate and just thinking, that can't be me. Surely I'm not going to be able to be that person. And eventually I just found the belief, and that's another message I think I want to say today, that my work's about giving people a belief in them. And by participating in these journey-based arts experiences, they feel valued, their stories are validated, and actually they can make a difference in somebody else's heart when you screen it and share it, and that impacts somebody else and relates, that it relates to them. So just to give you an idea of some of the projects that we do, this one was called the 1%. It was a small group of children that were leaving the care system but wanted to tell their story, and basically felt like whenever the media talked about children from care, they basically diminished their potential and sort of put stereotypes and limitations on where they might go, because statistically X, Y, and Z, and prison and teenage pregnancy and all the rest of it. And they felt like that was being put on them, and that they weren't all the same, and that they weren't just a number, they were just a young person in a set of circumstances they had no control over. And this was all really about giving them a platform to have a voice. So it was part of York Media Digital Festival, and we produced it with, like I said, a group of young female care leavers, and we lodged it at Everyman Cinema and had a question answered sort of thing afterwards. And it was one of the most profound events I think that I've ever been at. Like, there was people in there that were adults that had been through the care system, and they were just like, it was just a massive connection and just a really moving experience. So I'm gonna actually show you a little clip of that too.
Every child in the care system have their own story. No story is ever the same.
We are entitled to not be judged for being brought up in care.
I believe that the care family are some of the wisest people you'll meet. To have battled through life's darkest hours and to have continued to fight.
The struggles are constant, from stereotypes to the lasting effects of trauma, causing most young people to suffer from mental health.
Having a care experience doesn't make you a bad person or someone who will make poor decisions. It makes you a stronger and more determined person.
Not all children and young people in care are the same and aren't all trouble causing, but want extra love and support that we haven't yet been given.
Welcome. Welcome to the 1%.
The work you see tonight has been created by care experienced young people
On different stages of the care journey.
The media often portrays children in care and care leavers.
As weaker or underachievers
We believe the care family are some of the wisest people.
you'll ever meet.
We are here to make a movement, so help us to be the movement. I am not a number on a sheet of paper. I'm not a statistic.
I am not a negative headline in the news.
I'm not another story in the media.
I am not a file or a case number.
I'm not a stereotype. I'm not stigma or attachment issues.
Or mental health.
I'm not dreamless. I'm not hopeless.
I'm not written off already. I'm a person with a story, starting out on my own journey.
I can make my own decisions.
I can be positive about the future.
I have hopes and dreams.
And aspirations and things I want to achieve.
I can go to college.
Or university.
I can believe in myself.
I can get a job or start a career.
I can be independent.
I can be someone.
I can go somewhere in life. I can achieve all this with help and support.
So if you give me the opportunity, I can rise.
If you give me the support, I can grow.
If you listen, I can feel heard.
If you care, we can accomplish great things.
Let's replace limitations with positive expectations.
We have dreams and aspirations.
Really annoying how it does that. Anyway, I really enjoyed working with young people, and they were really passionate about their message. And like I said, we do lots of different types of videos and arts installations and exhibitions, and collaborate. We like to collaborate with professional artists, enriching really what we do and enriching those journeys, and bringing in musicians, working with theatre companies, you know, bringing in different aspects of storytelling and exploring with them people what their story is and what the story is that they want to tell. And it's about building relationships as well, and it's about trusted relationships where you work in an empathic, non-judgmental way. This is a picture of a group of volunteers that I was working with as part of Change, Grow, Live, which is a national charity that helps people in recovery. And these people are all become volunteers out of their recovery journey. And some of them are now moving into employment. So they created a creative campaign to share that story about how they've come through the door and they've transformed their lives in order to drive really a recruitment drive for people to come and change their lives and get involved and get learning and experience and qualifications and employment opportunities through an organisation that's helping people affected by the thing that they're struggling with. And then I don't actually know how much time I've got, but unless you kick me out, I'm just going to show you not all of this, but a clip of it, just because I think one of the things that this shows is it's like stories are our lives. And this one's working with people living with dementia. And the project was basically students from the University of York connected up, matched up with, paired up with a person in a care home that was living with dementia. And over a series of weeks, on a regular basis, they would meet up and they would talk about their story. And it was so amazing and fascinating to see the lights come on in these people. So I just wanted to really to finish on a...
It really works well.
Did you used to go dancing with him then?
We can.
Yeah. Did you
Yeah.
go with him?
Yeah.
Were you a good dancer?
Me?
Yeah.
I was.
You was.
But I've got 2 right feet now instead of 2 left feet.
Oh, great. Yeah, I can't dance to save my life.
Of course you can. Slow, slow, quick, quick, slow.
I think they've just got a great relationship with whoever they've been paired with, and they're still benefiting themselves from having that level of in-depth conversation about their own lives as well as the lives of the residents.
From just me coming in on a weekly basis to just come and sit and chat with Ben, he's enjoyed the process a lot, so have I. We've built a really good friendship.
She was a lovely mum. She was so loving, she was so hard working. She'd often put her arms around me and cuddle me, and I can feel it now. It seems balmy really, but I can, because she often used to put her arms around me and she'd say, my lad, you know.
Yeah. Helping with pigeons, I'd help me dad with anything.
Did your sisters help him as well, or was it just you?
Oh no, they were too la-di-da.
Would they not?
The students can validate their experiences. They've kind of made friendship, and it's really nice to see.
I just think it was a fantastic opportunity, and I'm just, really privileged that we were given the opportunity to do that. And the residents, I know, have really enjoyed it.
I think life stories should be happening everywhere because it's valuable.
I feel like it's something that's really important, and it's something that every care home should have. I feel very proud to kind of have started this off.
Down to go across the wide Missouri.
Oh, goodness me, that's got me really emotional again. Like, I love that film. It's so beautiful. Where am I? All over the place. Okay, so just to finish off, I'm just a bit of an insight into the other bits and pieces of work that I do. I've worked with young travellers trying to, tackle the racism. It's sort of the last remaining acceptable racism where there's a stereotype about travellers, and young people are growing up with that stereotype and that label and that pressure. And so it was about showing them as human beings, really, and then having impactful events where you get people involved in the conversation afterwards. These are guys that are campaigners and activists trying to fight against poverty in the UK. Did a film campaign with them. I'm working with children as part of a systems change project. It's called Together with Young People, and they're creating their own showcase and posters to shout about the issues that are important to them. I'm helping organisations to promote their stories and share the things that they do in the community and the impacts they're making with local communities, and always tackling the issues that matter. Like I said before, I lost a brother to suicide, so to make a film about suicide was a real privilege and an honour, and it's a beautiful film that these guys have made with lived experience, and have been screening it in private screenings, having question and answering, lots of interesting conversations coming out of it, and people relating to it, accessing support, signposting to help, that kind of thing, getting communities talking, reducing the stigma, and making an impact, trying to get your work out there, get it into the media, get people to hear about the issue, not just about the work, and get that into the spotlight. Thank you very much.
Oh, you had me going there as well, Kev. I have to bring my hankies the next time you do a talk, I think. That was amazing. Thank you very much. I always love to hear the stories that you tell, Kevin. In fact, all 3 of your presentations have been amazing and very different. But I think there's a lot of continuity that's sort of coming through between the 3. So we're going to start a little bit of a panel discussion. We've got a few questions coming through the Q&A. If you think of any more participants, feel free to chuck them in, and we'll answer them as we go. So just one for Kev. Maz Carolia says she's an ex-care leaver and she absolutely loves your film. What lessons did you learn from the experience, and is there anything you would have done differently?
I learned so many things from the experience, like working with children that have been through the care system. And like, they get a stereotype, but they are some of the most tenacious, powerful, articulate, strong people, and like, you can learn a lot from that. So yeah, and could I do anything different? I think you can always reflect on the process that you've been through, and I think, you know, complacency is no good. You always need to look to see what you could have done better and improve, and I'm always trying to sort of do that. So yeah, but it was a privilege and an honor really to work with them. They were amazing.
You're getting a lot of love, Kev, in the chat box. Liz Cable, last two presentations, so moving. Thank you, inspires me. Claire Boardman, thank you, Kev, wonderful work. And more compliments up here for Myra and Simon from Liz Cable. Ideas succinctly presented. And a question for you guys from Maz Carolia again. Read Twitter with owner Elon Musk giving free rein to trolls and extreme right-wingers. Do you not see Twitter as becoming more toxic, and how do you think that is going to affect your idea of creating new power?
So new power isn't really about being only for good. New power has been used by the alt-right as much as, and Islamic State as much as it's been used by Me Too. So new power is really just an academic recognition of functionality afforded by certain technologies. Wider than that, we could probably be here for about 5 hours talking about Elon Musk. I think one thing that's interesting is that one of the impediments of these social networks is that they're effectively, really, they're advertising companies. And data collection and advertising, their revenue comes through brands. And so that is the boss at the end of the day. And I think it's interesting that Elon Musk, if you think about what he represents, because I think it's interesting that Elon Musk represents the kind of 1950s boy wonder that appeals to the type of people who can afford to buy £60,000 cars. I think it's no mistake that he is there as the leader, and I can see that Twitter is maybe shifting and moving. I think a lot of people are watching intently to see what's going to happen, whether it will survive, how he will affect it. But to be honest, it's always been toxic. Twitter is that's why a lot of young people hate Twitter. It's mainly older people that like Twitter, because it is so toxic anyway. And if you compare that with something like, and that is by the design, by the way, if you compare that with something like the Taiwanese government, who have been doing really impressive things with embracing digital democracy, which is something I can never imagine the UK doing, because democracy is probably the last thing they want. But they have a platform called Polis, which is there to change laws without politicians having a say. So the way that works is that, for example, when Uber first arrived in Taiwan City, there needed to be some laws that would stipulate the terms and conditions of how that affected, for example, the traditional taxi industry. So Polis was, I think, was the first time that was used was for Uber. And so obviously people who are on the side of the taxi drivers would put forward a proposition that Uber should be banned. But they weren't the only stakeholders in Polis. They were the people who were consumers as well. And they would say, well, and people could upvote and downvote. That's all they could do. They couldn't comment back. That removed a whole load of toxicity. But when we, and so back and forth, people would put propositions, and the way that system was designed, it tended towards a central point. People would have to move towards each other to get the kind of majority that would change the law. It's really interesting. There's a book called Death of the Gods, which tells that story as well as others. But I think we also have to think about, when we talk about something like Twitter, is like, how do we define what democracy is? Do we define it as allowing certain people to say their thing and other people not being allowed? Where are the limits of that? Obviously, we have laws that stop certain things, and those platforms have to stop short of, for example, racist speech and so on and so forth. I don't know the ins and outs of Twitter, whether they've allowed things to pass through or whatever. But I think when we think about these platforms, we have to think seriously, probably for the first time in our lives, about what democracy really means. And I think that is a good thing.
Does anyone want to add to that? Very good. Okay, so another one from Julie Ward, 3 Braille presentations, totally wowed out. Really the question to Kev about doing anything differently, were the care leavers paid for their work on the project, and can they be?
Sometimes we do have reward sort of elements to it together with young people. One, you know, they can achieve things by doing things excellently. The young girls in the care project were volunteers, so it was something that they actually engineered. It was something that they wanted to start, and it actually came out of a really interesting conversation where a child that had left the care system, who was living on her own in a flat, and she was at college, and she said that people think it's about the bad days when you go home and you've got nobody to cry on their shoulder. And she said, but actually today I've achieved something at college and I'm going home to an empty flat and I've got no one to celebrate it with me. And it sort of got me thinking about perspectives, and it was something that I really wanted to do. So we went to Joseph Rowntree and they funded the production.
Brilliant, that's great. Okay, a couple of more questions. And now we've questioned this already in terms of, does this exist already or not, and maybe we don't already, but how will people be able to tell the difference between truth and fake in the future? So with the rapid development of these digital tools and technologies, you know, how are we actually going to be able to discern between, and can we now anyway, or is this already, are we just fooling ourselves that we can already discern between truth and falsehood already?
I think I mentioned, and I think, and it's not just an opinion. We know that people don't.
Sorry.
People don't. Well, number one, there's a difference between truth and honesty, and truth is a thing that we could say, for example, global warming, the human-induced global warming. There's a consensus from people who know what they're talking about. That doesn't mean that at some point in the future somebody might come up with something else and shows that actually it was another thing. That human history is full of misconceptions, but at the moment that's the best we got. We can call that truth, but it may end up not being true. So truth and fiction is kind of a dodgy territory, but I think we can talk about honesty and dishonesty. And we know that people can be fooled very easily, and they were fooled by words and newspaper articles long before any technology of the electronic variety came along. Will people be able to tell the difference between truth and fiction? No, they won't. That's what makes, you know, if anybody saw that show, The Traitor, what makes a show like that compelling is that there's a really foolish notion at the heart of it, which is that people believe that their intuition is going to tell them who is the traitor and who isn't, and it isn't. And that's what's hilarious to watch, because it's a really stupid, human, funny thing. And so, you know, so I think the question is, I think what's interesting is that the people who are trying to be honest and trying to create a debate that, you know, harks after the change they're after, need to have the tools to be able to fight back against those who are dishonest, who are just trying to sell you brands, who are just trying to sell you political parties for money.
Yeah, I think, you know, the tools that we need to help us do that are totally absent from, you know, our education system, all the systems we operate in. So being able to critically analyze, being able to creatively problem solve, being able to understand what questions to ask. So when we come into this future where, you know, 5G, 6G, 7G, when we're in a twin world, so we've got a virtual world that is, you know, we're almost like, you know, pulling a slider over and we're in another universe, and then there's multiple dimensions to it. We don't even know who we are. It's about going, what is, who is this for? Who does this serve? What is the outcome? Like when people get confused about free speech, or free speech is being used by the right as a fundamental freedom, but free speech for who? Who does it serve? What is the outcome? Is the outcome that vulnerable people get beaten up on the street? Then are you entitled to your free speech? Does everyone's opinion matter? When some people's opinions are heavily researched and interrogated and envelop multiple perspectives? Or is it just that you just thought of something and you decided to aggress it at someone? So we need to be able to be in a constant questioning mindset, and that's going to become more and more critical as you know, things get more complex. I mean, arguably the agenda was a bit more singular, there would be someone in power telling you the way, this is the story. But now it's going to be, you know, completely distributed across a global network. And we need to feel empowered. We need to feel like we can change stuff, and we need to get away from like despair, and which creates a massive vacuum of hope, and then we become paralyzed. We need hope, and we need to feel like we can change things, and that we have a say in the way the world's going to be made.
Chris, did you want to add to that?
I just I think even the idea of a truth is becoming a kind of slightly cute, archaic notion already, and you know, the far better way to spend your time as a youngster, particularly, would be to fine-tune your kind of critical thinking skills of not being happy with any one version of any story, being thirsty to seek out alternative life experiences and personal stories to then build your own picture and your own story. And I think actually that's one of the things we really need to try and protect is critical thinking. It always rings my alarm bells when I hear people criticize critical thinking, because I think, well, how can there possibly be anything negative about that, other than it makes that person less susceptible to the propaganda that you want to pump out. So yeah, the tools we need to learn to establish something approaching the truth are completely different, and they involve people making their own minds up and being just determined in listening to every side of every story. It's exhausting, but that's the truth.
Yeah, might I add that you mentioned cognitive flexibility theory, and it set me off on a Google search, and it reminded me of something that Robert Anton Wilson said. The author Robert Anton Wilson said that we wonder, and this is in the 70s, so right at the kind of flowering moment of postmodernism, he said that we all wander around in our own reality tunnel, and that if we want to prosper, then we need to put ourselves in other people's reality tunnels, and many of them, and different ones. And I think it amounts to the same thing, right? And I think that's, in terms of storytelling, I think that was from your presentation, that was the thing I took away the most, is that is brilliant, because it hands a lot of agency, and you know, we talk a lot about agency, it hands a lot of agency over to your audience to put the pieces together for themselves. And I really like that.
And I think that kind of answers my next question, which is, as storytellers, what responsibilities do we have to our audiences, if any? And is that one there, you know, where you're putting yourself in multiple realities and enabling folk to see things from multiple points of view? Is there any other responsibilities as storytellers you feel that we have?
I think so. The polyvocality is a good one in that context. I think another one as well, which is really important, is that, and I think it's really relevant to this discussion as well, which is that we constantly need to work hard to make sure that any of the stories that we tell mean that the audience can see themselves in that story. There are often too many stories which are about other folks, about other people, about impossible aspirations that you're never going to get. And I think that's, you know, one of the really interesting things now, when you examine other storytellers' work, you can see what they've done there. So yeah, certainly from our point of view, I think responsibility is to make sure that everybody can see themselves in that story.
Is there anyone want to add to that?
There's some really great research and books about that, and Frank Rose, I think it is, his new book about immersion, about the more that you can project yourself into a story, the more immersed you become. And when you're immersed, the possibilities of embodying a story and changing your perspective and empathizing with another point of view is really much more likely to happen. So these are all sort of kind of little lenses into where we can go in terms of changing behaviors and belief systems, which at this point we're sort of being led by algorithms that bed us down into our position. Like, whatever you do, arguing with someone on Twitter, all that happens is they just cling to their view. And actually the death work that we've been just doing is based on some research that people who fear death, they are more likely to believe in defined stories of themselves. So whether that's that they're nationhood, or they're this type of person, or they believe in owning a gun, for example. One of the bits of research was when a mass shooting happens, that people are, there's a crisis, and there's obviously a lot of despair and emotion flying around, that it doesn't matter whether you believe in guns or not. At that point of crisis, you're going to be more likely to believe what you already believe. So if there's a mass shooting and you believe in owning a gun, you'll believe in owning a gun more. And, you know, these things all touch with the, you know, complex psychology of who you are. So therefore, the more perspectives you have, the more you understand yourself, the more you know who you are, the less likely you're going to be susceptible to evil storytelling forces.
There's a beautiful moment in there's a beautiful moment in whatever you think of Ricky Gervais. There's a beautiful moment in Derek, the comedy about the old people's home, towards the end of one of the episodes, where soundtrack is Bones by Radiohead, and he cuts in these slow moving film images of people in the old people's home with archive footage of them when they're in their 20s, like being high divers and all sorts of things. There's something really powerful about connecting the old and the young as well in that way, and so that we can see ourselves in those older people. For example, such beautiful technique, so powerful, and just reminds people that old people were young once, like you, and yeah, so many things we can do.
And it's important to acknowledge that a lot of spaces of colour are naturally intergenerational spaces. So when we look at how we do things, there are these beautiful practices and cultural things that come out of many types of communities, and we should be open to learning and understanding that. So that particularly, Kev, your film about the old people and the young people together was just like, yeah, it got me hard.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is something beautiful about intergenerational, and you know, I've seen. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where I've seen it on telly, where they have a program where it was like children came in, like little children came into the care home, and like the connection between them was just like, wow, like I'm just loving watching that connection. And I think what I was going to say is that, you know, like based on that comment before about Twitter's sort of designed in that way to allow for divisiveness, is because that's where all the clicks and the traffic is. And in a way, if you look at all of the mainstream media, it's designed to divide. It really is. It polarizes, you know, so it takes an issue and it gets one person on the far left and one person on the far right who are never going to meet in the middle. And it's almost entertainment, you know. So then you know, the second level to that is the social media debate about the issue that the mainstream media is putting out, and all of the traffic and like you say, some people didn't learn to scroll past, which is my advice to this generation. It's like, you don't have to comment on everything, and it's not necessarily going to change the world. You know, you should speak up and should stand up for what you believe in, but you know, pick your battles. You can't fight every Barry, Tom, and John and Sally on Twitter, you know. And actually, that we can use media to bring people together, to connect rather than to divide. That's what I was going to say.
I just think as well, if you get those people who would seem to be divided on social media, and you got them in the same room, I guarantee you'd find they want the same things out of life. But yeah, you're completely right. There's this force which divides them and polarizes them. It's really, really unhelpful, I think.
It reminds me of this visual of dogs at either side of a gate just barking at each other, and then you take the gate away and they just stop and they look at each other and they're not quite sure what to do next, you know. Anyway, we've run out of time, guys. So on that note, can I say a massive thank you to my panelists and my speakers. That was a really excellent session. Again, I'm just totally amazed as to how many fabulous stories that we're hearing through these sessions. So a really big, massive thank you to you guys for your time, your expertise and your wisdom. It's been really fantastic. Thank you for our attendees as well for your brilliant questions and comments. Really appreciate that. Thank you to Maggie for being my rock again, and being there just in case everything goes tits up, and thankfully it didn't again. And our next session is going to be this evening, using digital storytelling to persuade. Now we're one man down on that, I'm afraid. Melody Ash from XR Stories is not very well, so can't make it, but we'll have Chris from Bright White again talking about using digital stories to persuade, and we'll have Louisa Rose Mackelson from Northern Fortress Films as well talking about some of her work. So check out that if you can. If you can't make it tonight, check out the recording, northerndigifest.co.uk. And finally, nice thank you again to our sponsors, Sign, for funding the festival, because without them we couldn't run it. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a fabulous day, and thanks again for all your help.
See you later. Bye.
Yeah, cheers.
Thanks, Heather. Bye.
Bye. Bye.